early in the planning for this 50th anniversary General Synod of the United Church of Christ, it was clear to us that we wanted far more than a celebration, although we have had that, and far than an encounter with celebrity, although we have also had that today. What we wanted to do was to invite outstanding people from all walks of life, artists, scientists, theologians, activists of all kinds, who could be with us to challenge us as we consider how we are to live out our public vocation as we move into our next 50 years. We also knew that we wanted someone who could come to speak to us about how personal faith is lived out in the public square, how personal faith and piety is reflected in the life of public service and politics. Our invitation to Senator Barack Obama, extended over a year ago, was a recognition of the thoughtful and articulate ways in which he has helped us to think about the relationship between piety and politics, between faith and public life. And of course, it was also a recognition that he is one of ours, a member of a great congregation in Chicago, Trinity United Church of Christ. Born in Hawaii, raised in New York, educated at Columbia University, Harvard Law School, Senator Obama has served as a church-based organizer, as a teacher of constitutional law, as a civil rights lawyer. He served in the Illinois State Senate and in 2004 was elected to the United States Senate. In all of those settings, he has given eloquent testimony to the way in which family and faith have shaped him for public service. It had long been our hope that Senator Obama's pastor, the Reverend Dr. Jeremiah A. Wright, would be able to be here to introduce his parishioner to us. Dr. Wright is one of the most distinguished leaders in the United Church of Christ, and it is well known that he and Trinity have had a profound and shaping influence on Senator Obama's vocation. Unfortunately, Dr. Wright had a long-standing commitment to a wedding at Trinity Church this weekend. And as every pastor in this room knows, if the choice is between a United States senator and the mother of a bride, it's no contest, and he made the right decision. But we are pleased that Dr. Wright has provided a video introduction in a more personal way to present to us our speaker for this afternoon. So following Dr. Wright's words, I invite you all to stand and greet Senator Obama, welcoming him to his family gathering, the United Church of Christ.
Grace and peace be unto you. This is Reverend Jeremiah Wright, Senior Pastor of Trinity United Church of Christ in Chicago, Illinois. It is my signal honor and privilege to be able to introduce to you a man who has been a member of our congregation for 22 years. I was privileged to be the person to pray the prayer of invocation when he was elected, the night he was elected, and when he was inaugurated, he invited my wife Rayma and me to come to Washington, D.C. That was a proud moment in the life of the congregation. He had been in public service for 6 years in the state senate before running for the national office. The day after he was inaugurated, I was asked in a public forum at the Massachusetts Conference of the United Church of Christ, what advice would you give to Senator Obama? And my advice to him is the way I want to introduce him to you. I said I would tell him today to be the same Barack that I've known for 20 years. For 20 years, this has been a man who is a man of principle and a man of faith, A man who doesn't draw lines in the sand and say, either you believe what I believe or something is wrong with you. But a man who does not compromise his belief, allows you to be different, allows you to believe and think as you believe and think, trying to find common ground because, as he puts it, your children and my children have to grow up in this world together. I have religious beliefs, I have religious convictions. I will teach those to my children. I don't intend to make them public policy and force your children to believe what my children believe. A man who believes that Muslim, Jew, Christian, atheist, non-believers, black, white, Indonesian, African, South American, Chicano, Native American, Aboriginal, Australians, all are God's children and all can live together and work together fruitfully and productively on God's earth because God does love the world, which includes all people. That's the Barack that I have known for 20 years. I would say to him today the same thing I said to him the day he was elected. Keep on being that Barack Obama. You are God's child. We love you. Please put your hands together and welcome this Christian gentleman, a member of Trinity United Church of Christ, Chicago, Senator Barack Obama.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, what a wonderful greeting. God bless you all. Thank you so much. To all my brothers and sisters in the United Church of Christ, I want to begin by thanking Reverend John Thomas for his outstanding leadership on behalf of the General Synod. I want to thank Edith Guffey, who has been so helpful to us and to everyone who's involved in this wonderful event. I want to acknowledge the members of the Collegium of Officers, my Illinois Conference Minister, Reverend Dr. Jane Fissler-Hoffman. We've got the Illinois contingent over here, it sounds like. To all the delegates and visitors, and of course, to my pastor, Dr. Reverend Jeremiah A. Wright, Jr., and my fellow members of Trinity United Church of Christ on 95th Street on the south side of Chicago. And in case you guys haven't been there, everybody's invited. Anytime you are in Chicago, because we can, the Spirit moves in Trinity. And we got a pretty good choir, too. You know, it is great to be here. I'm speaking to a lot of churches recently, so it's nice to be speaking to one that's so familiar. I understand you switch venues at considerable expense and inconvenience because of unfair labor practices at the place that you were going to be having this synod. And that tells me that the past 50 years have not weakened your resolve as faithful witnesses of the gospel. I had to see that. You know, it's been several months now since I announced I was running for president. And in that time, I've had a chance to talk with Americans all across this country. And I found that no matter where I am or who I'm talking to, there's a common theme that emerges. It's that folks are hungry for change. They're desperate for something new. They're ready to turn the page on the old politics and the old policies, whether it's the war in Iraq or the healthcare crisis we're in or a school system that's leaving too many children behind despite the slogans. But what's fascinating to me is that I get a sense there's a hunger deeper than that, a hunger that goes beyond any single cause or any single issue. Because it seems to me that each day, thousands of Americans are going about their lives. They're dropping the kids off at school. They're driving to work. They're shopping at the mall. They're trying to stay on their diets. They're trying to kick a cigarette habit. And they're coming to the realization something is missing. They're deciding that their work, their possessions, their diversions, their sheer busyness is not enough. They want a sense of purpose, a narrative arc to their lives. They're looking to relieve a chronic loneliness. And so they need an assurance that somebody out there cares about them, that somebody is listening to them, that they're not just destined to travel down that long road towards nothingness. And this restlessness, this search for meaning, I understand. It is familiar to me. Many of you know I was not raised in a particularly religious household. My father, who I didn't know, returned to Kenya when I was just 2. He was nominally a Muslim, since that's the village in which he had been born was a Muslim village. But by the time he was a young adult, he was an atheist. My mother, whose parents were non-practitioners and Methodists, and there was a whole bunch of complicated stuff between Baptists and Methodists back in small-town Kansas in the 30s and 40s that my grandmother has tried to explain to me because she was Methodist and they were elevated a little bit higher, according to her, in the small town where they grew up. But my mother, who came from these Kansas roots, was one of the most spiritual souls that I ever knew. She had this enormous capacity for wonder. She understood how fundamentally mysterious life could be. And she lived, as well as anybody I've ever known, by the golden rule. And yet she had a healthy skepticism of religion as an institution, perhaps because in the churches that she had seen as a child, she had heard church deacons utter racial epithets and had seen that actions didn't match up with the words that were being preached from the pulpit. And so she developed this skepticism, and as a consequence, so did I. It wasn't until after college, when I went to work to Chicago as a community organizer for a group of Christian churches, that I confronted my own spiritual dilemma. In a sense, what brought me to Chicago in the first place was there for some sort of meaning in my life. I had been inspired by the civil rights movement, inspired by young people, straight back, clear-eyed, pouring into the South because they wanted to create a better world. I wanted to be part of that. I had been too young to participate in the civil rights movement at the time, but I wanted in some way to feel a part, a small part of the continuing battle for justice by helping to rebuild some of Chicago's poorest neighborhoods. So it's 1985 and I'm in Chicago and I'm working with these churches and with lots of lay people, all of whom are much older than I am. And I found that I recognized in these people a part of myself. I learned that everybody I met had a sacred story to tell when you took the time to listen to them. I discovered that they recognized a part of themselves in me too. They saw that I knew scriptures, at least intellectually. They saw that many of the values I held and that propelled me in my work were values that they shared. But I think they also sensed that a part of me remained removed, remained detached. That skepticism was still lodged in me. They understood that I was an observer, in some sense, in their midst. And some of the pastors who I was working with, they would smile and nod during the meeting, and one of them would wink at another one and say, "Now, Brock, what member what church are you? And I'd mutter and I'd hem and haw. And they'd say, you know, it might be easier to organize churches if you went to church sometime. And slowly I came to realize that something was missing. That without an anchor for my beliefs, without a commitment to a particular faith, at some level, I would always remain an observer. I would always remain apart. I would always remain, in some sense, alone. And it's around this time that these pastors who had asked me if I was going to be joining a church gave me a little more of a prod, and I thought, well, that makes sense. So one Sunday, I put on one of the few clean jackets I had, because I was only getting paid $13,000 a month, plus car expenses. A year. What did I say? A month. That would have been pretty good. I would have stayed community organizing. I was getting paid $13,000 a year, plus car expenses. So I didn't have a lot of fancy clothes, but I figured I should get dressed up. I wore a jacket, didn't have a tie, like apparently I still afford one. And so I go over to Trinity United Church of Christ on 95th Street, and I heard Reverend Wright deliver a sermon called The Audacity of Hope. And during the course of that sermon, he introduced me to someone named Jesus Christ. And I learned that my sins could be redeemed. And I learned that those things I was too weak to accomplish myself, he accomplished with me if I placed my trust in him. And in time, I came to see faith as more than just a comfort to the weary or a hedge against death, but rather as an active, palpable agent in the world and in my own life. It was because of these newfound understandings that I was finally able to walk down the aisle of Trinity one day and affirm my Christian faith. And I say it came about as a choice, not an epiphany. I didn't fall out in church like sometimes folks do, at least in Trinity. I don't know if they do that in some of the other congregations. So I didn't fall out. I made a decision. And by the way, the questions, some of the doubts didn't magically disappear. The skeptical bent of my mind didn't suddenly vanish. But kneeling beneath that cross on the south side, I felt I heard God's Spirit beckoning me. I submitted myself to his will and dedicated myself to discovering his truths and carrying out his works. Now, my journey is a part of a larger journey, one shared by all who've ever sought to apply the values of their faith to our society. It's a journey that takes us back to our nation's founding, when none other than a UCC inspired the Boston Tea Party. We were troublemakers even back then. We were shaking things back then. We helped bring an empire to its knees. In the following century, men and women of faith waded into the battles over prison reform and temperance, public education and women's rights, and above all, abolition. We saw rid these shores of the scourge of slavery. And when the Civil War was fought and our country was dedicated to a new birth of freedom, they took on the problems of an industrialized nation, fighting the crimes against society and the sins against God that they felt were being committed in our factories and in our slums. And when these battles were overtaken by others, and when the wars they opposed were waged and won, these faithful foot soldiers kept marching. They stood on the Edmund Pettus Bridge as the blows of billy clubs rained down. They held vigils across the country when 4 little girls were killed in the 16th Street Baptist Church. They cheered on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial when Dr. King delivered his prayer for our country. And in all these ways, They help make this country more decent and more just. So doing the Lord's work is a thread that runs through our politics since the beginning. It puts the lie to the notion that separation of church and state in America, a principle that we all must uphold, a principle that I have embraced as a constitutional lawyer, but more importantly as a Christian, that the notion of separation in church of state in America somehow means that faith should have no role in public life. I dispute that. Imagine Lincoln's second inaugural address without its reference to the judgments of the Lord, or King's "I Have a Dream" speech without his reference to all of God's children, or President Kennedy's inaugural without the words, "Here on earth, God's work must truly be our own." At each of these junctures, by summoning a higher truth and embracing a universal faith, our leaders inspired ordinary people to achieve extraordinary things. But somehow, somewhere along the way, faith stopped being used to bring us together. Faith started being used to drive us apart. Faith got hijacked. Faith got hijacked partly because of the so-called leaders of the Christian right who've been too eager to exploit what divides us. At every opportunity, they've told evangelical Christians that Democrats disrespect their values and dislike their church, while suggesting to the rest of the country that religious Americans care only about issues like abortion and gay marriage, school prayer, and intelligent design. There was even a time when the Christian Coalition determined that its #1 legislative priority was tax cuts for the rich. I don't know what Bible they were reading. I've been looking at what version that was. Was that the King James version or New Standardized? Well, I don't know. But it didn't jive with any versions I read. There's this whole thing about a camel going through the eye of a... But here's the thing. I'm hopeful because I think there's an awakening taking place in America. Coming together around a simple truth, that we are all connected, that I am my brother's keeper, I am my sister's keeper, and that it's not enough to just believe this, to proclaim the words. We have to do our part to make it a reality. My faith teaches me that I can sit in church and pray all I want, but I won't be fulfilling God's will unless I go out and do the Lord's work. That's something that the UCC has known for a long time, but I'm also encouraged by the fact that pastors, friends of mine in the evangelical community like Rick Warren and T.D. Jakes and organizations like World Visions and Catholic Charities are wielding their enormous influence to confront poverty, HIV, AIDS, and the genocide in Darfur. Religious leaders like my friend Jim Wallace and Rabbi David Saperstein and Nathan Diamond are working for justice and fighting for change. And all across the country, communities of faith are sponsoring daycare programs, building senior centers, and in so many other ways taking part in the project of American renewal. Now, what we also understand, though, is that our values should express themselves not just through our churches or synagogue temples or mosques. They should express themselves through our government. Because whether it's poverty or racism, the uninsured or the unemployed, war or peace, the challenges we face today are not simply technical problems in search of the perfect 10-point plan. They are moral problems rooted in societal indifference and individual callousness, in the imperfections of man, the cruelties of man towards man. We have to reach in to ourselves. There's a spiritual dimension to the work that we do. And so long as we're not doing everything in our personal and collective power to solve them, we know the conscience of our nation cannot rest. Our conscience can't rest so long as 37 million Americans are poor and forgotten by their leaders in Washington. We need to heed the biblical call to care for the least and lift the poor out of despair. That's why it's not just a policy issue when we fight to expand the earned income tax credit and the minimum wage. It's a moral issue. If you're working 40 hours a week, you should not be living in poverty. But we also know that government initiatives are not enough. Each of us in our own lives needs to do what we can do to help the poor. And until we do, our conscience cannot rest. Our conscience can't rest so long as nearly 45 million Americans don't have health insurance. Millions more who do are going bankrupt trying to pay for it. I have made a solemn pledge that I sign a universal health care bill into law by the end of my first term as President of these United States that will cover every single American and cut the typical family's premiums. We can do this. It's not a matter of policy or ideology. It's a moral commitment. We can do this. Can do this. It's a matter of conscience and moral commitment. This is a matter of conscience that we stop the genocide being carried out in Darfur. Until the killing stops, our conscience cannot rest. It's a problem that's brought together churches and synagogues and mosques and people of all faiths as part of a grassroots movement. Universe states, including Illinois, are taking part in a divestment campaign to pressure the Sudanese government to stop the killings. It's helping. It's not enough, but it's helping. Young people in particular are inspired because they understand that there is nothing to excuse inaction in the face of atrocity. And it's a testament of what we can achieve when good people with strong convictions stand up for their beliefs. It's not just Darfur. It's a matter of conscience. Our conscience cannot rest until we close Guantanamo Bay and stop tolerating the torture of our enemies. That is not who we are, UCC. That is not who we are, Americans. It's not consistent with our traditions of justice and fairness. It offends our conscience. It offends our conscience to detain people without charge. It offends our conscience to suspend habeas corpus. It offends our traditions as Americans. Our conscience cannot rest so long as the war goes on in Iraq. It's a war that I'm proud I opposed from the start, a war that should have never been authorized, a war that should have never been waged. We knew then it was a bad idea. We knew then it was going to cost us billions of dollars and thousands of lives and would make us less safe in the world. We knew it then. You know, I have a plan that would have already begun deploying our troops out of Iraq with the goal of bringing all our combat brigades out by March 31st of next year. The president vetoed a similar plan. But the president doesn't have the last word. We're going to keep at it. We're going to keep organizing until we bring this war to an end, because the Iraq War is not just a problem, it is also a moral problem. It's a matter of conscience. Just as it's a matter of conscience that there are 12 million undocumented immigrants in America, most of them working in our communities, many attending churches, many contributing to our country. Now, as children of God, we believe in the worth and dignity of every human being. It doesn't matter where that person comes from, what documents they have, they're still children of God. We believe that everyone everywhere should be loved and given the chance to work and raise a family. That's what we believe as Christians. Now, as Americans, we also know that this is a nation of laws. We can't have those laws broken with impunity. We can't have 2,000 crossing our borders illegally every day. We can't ignore that we have a right and a duty to protect our borders. We can't ignore the very real concerns of Americans who are not worried about illegal immigration simply because they're racist or xenophobic, but because they fear that it will result in lower wages when they're already struggling to raise a family. There are legitimate concerns on both sides. And so this will be a difficult debate that we're going to be having in Congress next week. Consensus and compromise will not come easy. The last time we took up immigration reform, it failed. But we can't walk away this time. Our conscience cannot rest until we not only secure our borders, which we must do, but until we give the 12 million undocumented immigrants in this country a chance to rise up out of the shadows, a chance to pay a fine and wait in line behind those who came here legally, but to become a part of this community that is recognized, so that they no longer have to live in fear and so that they're no longer the wages of Americans, because they now have rights that are being observed. We will all have to make concessions to achieve this. That's what compromise is about. But at the end of the day, we cannot walk away, not simply because we need to pass a bill, but so that we can finally address the real concerns of Americans and the persistent hopes of all the brothers and sisters who want nothing more than their own chance at our common American dream. These are some of the challenges to our conscience as Americans, as people of faith. Meeting them will not be easy. There is real evil in the world. There's hardship and there's pain and there's suffering in the world. We should be humble in our belief that we can eliminate all that hardship and all that heartache. But we should not use our humility as an excuse for inaction. We shouldn't use obstacles we face as an excuse for cynicism. We have to do what we can, knowing it's hard, not swinging from naive idealism to bitter defeatism, but rather accepting the fact that we're not going to solve every problem overnight, but we can still make a difference. We can recognize the truth. We can recognize the truth that is at the heart of the UCC, that the conversation is not over, that our roles are not defined, that in texts and modern voices, God is still speaking, challenging us to change not just our own lives, but change the world around us. We are his instrument. We are his vessel. We can bring about changes. I'm hearing from evangelicals who may not agree with progressives on every issue, but agree that poverty has no place in a world of plenty, that hate and bigotry has no place in the hearts of believers, and that we all have to be good stewards of God's creation. From Willow Creek to the emerging churches, from the Southern Baptist Convention to the National Association of Evangelicals, folks are realizing that the four walls of the church are too small for a big guy. God is still speaking to us. God is still speaking to us. I'm hearing from progressives who understand that if we want to communicate our hopes, values as Americans, we can't abandon the field of religious discourse. That's why organizations are rising up across the country to reclaim the language of faith to bring about change. They understand that God is still speaking to us. He's still speaking to our Catholic friends who are holding up a consistent ethic of life that goes beyond abortion, one that includes a respect for life and dignity, whether it's in Iraq or in poor neighborhoods, in African villages, or even on death row. They're telling me that their conversation means to be Catholic continues. They're questioning, they're doubting, but they understand that God is still speaking to us. Right here in the UCC, we're hearing from God about what it means to be a welcoming church and that holds on to our Christian witness. The UCC is still listening because God is still speaking to us. Now, some of you may have heard me talk a while back in Selma, Alabama about the Joshua generation. I was relating to my relationship to the civil rights movement and how that previous generation that marched and got hosed and were beaten, that they were like Moses. They might not be getting to the promised land, but we wouldn't be there. And there's a story I want to share that takes place before Moses passed the mantle of leadership on to Joshua. It comes from Deuteronomy 30, when Moses talks to his followers about the challenges they'll find when they reach the promised land without him. To the Joshua generation, these challenges seemed momentous, and they were. And Moses says, "What I am commanding you is not too difficult for you or beyond your reach. It is not up in the heaven, nor is it beyond the sea. No, the word is very near. It is on your lips and in your heart. It is on your lips, it is in your heart." It's an idea that's often forgotten or dismissed in cynical times. Sometimes people talk about hope all the time. The press is a little cynical. They say, "Oh, he's a hope monger. He's a hope peddler." But that's okay. It's a very simple concept that we all have the power within ourselves to make this a better world. We all have the capacity to do justice and show mercy. We all have a chance to treat others with dignity, and we all have a chance to rise above what divides us and come together to meet those challenges we can't meet alone. It's the wisdom Moses imparted to those who would succeed him, us, the Joshua generation. And it's a lesson we need to remember today as members of that Joshua generation. So let us rededicate ourselves to a new kind of politics, a politics of conscience. Let's come together, Protestant and Muslim and Hindu and Jew, believer and, yes, non-believer alike. We're not going to agree on everything, but we can disagree without being disagreeable. We can affirm our faith without endangering the separation of church and state, as long as we understand that when we're in the public square, we have to speak in universal terms that everyone can understand. And if we can do that, if we can embrace a common destiny, then I believe we'll just help bring about a more hopeful day in America. We'll not just be caring for our own souls. We'll do God's work right here on this precious earth. Thank you very much. God bless you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.